And we're live. Welcome back to another high conversation. I'm your host, 𝗥cie𝗯 𝗣𝗿𝗶. This week, we are joined by our special guest, Rob Pardi, and we are thrilled to have him here and talk about today's topic, which is physical courage. So welcome, Rob. If you can introduce yourself and tell everyone a little bit more about you.
Sure. Well, thank you very much for having me. And it's definitely a topic that is near and dear to my heart. So I'm really looking forward to it. I've seen some of your other lives. So I am a New York-born ex-investment banker who was married to an amazing woman that unfortunately passed away from breast cancer. And that sort of was a moment in my life that I decided what type of dream or what type of story would I like to look back on from that event? And so I became a life coach, author, personal growth retreat host, and I'm calling in from Italy because I decided to move to Italy. And I actually live where my great-grandfather came from, which is pretty interesting as well, to think of the whole full circle moment that now I actually walk the streets that he walked 100 and something years ago. So that's who I am.
Well, we are thrilled to have you here. So let's take it back a little bit. You mentioned your wife who passed away from cancer. Let's talk a little bit more about her for a second, because I think that's part of the bigger part of the story that you share. The physical courage that she presented during her experiences, her survival mode, what impact did that have on you? And like, were you able to see the physical courage in those moments that she wanted to just keep going and fighting and trying new treatments and stuff? And maybe that's too preemptive if people don't really know all about the diving into the juiciness here. So yeah.
Well, I'll unpack that a little bit, right? So people get sort of an understanding of it. So my wife was a very determined woman, a very determined girl, actually, when I met her, because she was 17 and I was 19. When she was diagnosed, she was studying to an MD PhD. And so her diagnosis, which happened to be in the Middle East, because I had just gotten a job in Abu Dhabi and she wanted to come out and live with me while I was out there. So she was taking a sabbatical. And so just because of the events, not because of the Islamic religion or anything like that, the male doctor told me the news before actually telling her the news, because it was just very unusual to have this healthy American woman, very young at that time in 1998, a 31-year-old woman did not get breast cancer. It was just unheard of. Unfortunately, today it's common. And so he broke the news to me. I broke the news to her, which worked out perfectly because my wife was somebody that really only ever wanted to know she was doing her best. So she never knew her GPA score. She never knew her MCAT scores. That was for me to deal with and fill out on the applications. So this fit her model perfectly. She said, Robert, I know enough of medicine to be dangerous to myself. So I would like you to deal with all the specifics, and I just show up as a patient. I don't want to be in my doctor head, and I just want to be the patient and walk out. The physical courage in terms of the fighting, and we tended in a way not to use that word or use the word battle. We stayed more in, this was a journey, partly because for the both of us as well, a battle requires a lot of mental energy that can take away from actually living in the moment and living your life. So we were very conscious at the very beginning, very intentional. But what I did see is, yes, while she was doing everything she could to prolong her life. Now, the funny thing is she became the founding director of palliative care at New York Hospital with metastatic breast cancer. So as a palliative care physician, I learned a lot through her because she would say, Robert, this book talks about cancer. Can you please read it and then edit out what I don't want to know? So I learned a lot about palliative care. And there's a difference between extending life and extending death. And we were very conscious of when that period might happen. But it wasn't that she was battling to live longer. She was motivated courageously to achieve her dreams. And the funny thing was, I'm technically titled her caregiver, but I left my job not because she needed caregiving. It was only up until the very end that she really needed assistance. She was very independent. I realized I left to be her coach. That's how I wound up being a coach, because I did everything possible to help her achieve her dreams. And so the idea that she didn't want to know about her disease was her coping mechanism. And she courageously would walk out of her doctor's office, even if it was the top doctor in New York City. If the doctor, and it happened at a very known institution in New York, that the doctor thought that she was making a wrong decision and thought she should start to tell Desiree some things. And Desiree just got up and said, "You're not the doctor for me," and walked out. So I could have a moment with the doctor, let's just say, because that was my wife's coping mechanism. And the idea that as a doctor, you should do no harm means that you have to recognize those coping mechanisms. So the physical courage that I saw through my wife is that she decided that she was going to live the experience of cancer as she defined. And if she didn't find a doctor that was going to recognize that, we would go to find another doctor. But this was her journey. She was not the disease. She was a person living around, as she would say, living around the disease. And that's the way she wanted to live. So I saw that physical courage. The other thing I say all the time is, I saw her doing everything possible to stay with me for as long as possible. And that is something that is, to this day, I mean, it's something that I know, even though I joke and I say, well, she was doing it for herself and her job, and maybe I came third, maybe I came fourth because she loved our dog. But, the whole thing was that physical courage as well was to say, I'm going to do everything possible to be with you and live the life we were meant to live. And so she did endure a lot as well in terms of treatments and surgeries and all different types of protocols. And she was in a wheelchair for a while, and she needed TPN for a while, the liquid nutrition. And there just came a point when we came to that extending death. And she was aware of that because of her physical symptoms. And she directed me at that point in time. Another example, I think, of physical courage is that she said to me, because neither of us wanted to ever use the word dying or death, but she was in the hospital, and we were trying everything to get her back to normal. And she just turned to me and she said, "Robert, I'm tired." And I said, "Okay, baby, rest." And I knew she was telling me, transition to comfort care. Please take me off life sustaining. The moment she said that, I went to go speak to the doctor, and I came back and I thought she had fallen asleep, and she had fallen into a coma. And that was the last conversation we had. So the physical courage, she stayed as long as she could, but she also needed to direct me what to do. And she needed to know I was okay with that. And in a way, not that I had to give her permission, but the journey was our journey, even though she carried the disease, because I was the one that always knew the information. She only thought the cancer had spread to her liver. And when she passed away, she had cancer in her spine, her small intestines, her peritoneum, one lung, and her liver. And every 6 months or so, I would say, oh, well, now it's here. Now it's here. Now it's here. But it was my job to just accept that, carry it with me. And this is where I understood that purpose, my definition of purpose, which I defined during that period, was when your passion, so my wife was my passion, when your passions come in alignment with your values, and my values were supporting somebody that I love and giving the results away. It wasn't to get a pat on the back saying, oh, I'm such a great husband. It was that I'll carry this. I'll stay quiet. Nobody needs to know. You think everything is going in one direction and it makes you happy. We're all good. And so that's where I'd say in her, I saw the physical courage of wanting to make the most of her life. And a lot of my skills that I brought to this came from growing up with an abusive alcoholic father. And so I learned very early on uncertainty. I learned about adversity. I learned about resilience. I learned about grit. I learned about all these things that when the time came, I had this skill set. So as soon as Desiree was diagnosed, I could reach into that bag and help us both live the life that we lived. And the reason my first book was called Chasing Life is because it's not about chasing the number of years. You know, we can look at a tombstone, and it was funny, we were talking about Halloween before this and tombstones, right? So there's those 2 dates, but life is lived inside, right? It's the dash between the 2 dates. And what if you measured life by the amount of joy instead of the number of years? So we made sure that cancer was an accent. I say this all the time in this way. It was an accent color on the painting of our life to highlight joy. It wasn't the dominant color. And the courage in that is to actually sit there and say, and this is where I think physical courage, mental courage, you know, it all sort of comes together. The courage to sit there and say, we're going to live the best life we can around a disease is really difficult, because, you know, there's times when we love to go to Arizona. We love to go to Vermont every year because our anniversary was in October. And there came a point in time where, because of the chemo, she was having a lot of bowel issues. And, you know, it took a lot of courage to actually get in the car thinking that we might have to stop on the side of the road because she's not going to be able to control whatever it was. And we wound up making it a joke. We stopped at, you know, rooftop inns and all these other places that, you know, you see on the side of the road and nobody ever stays in. And we'd go in and we'd get a room so she could use the bathroom if that's what we needed to do. And then, you know, laugh a little bit or whatever, and then get back in the car. And there's a lot of courage in saying, you know, I am living my life for any of us. But with that, on top of it, was sort of say, I'm going to live my life and I am not going to let a disease dictate what I live. And she did that to the best of her ability. I like to think I helped a little bit. So
Thank you, Rob, for sharing story and Desiree's as well. And I want to hold space for you to acknowledge you are this beacon of physical courage. It's not just Desiree. What I see in you as you're sharing your story and recounting the experiences and joy that you had with your wife, his moments, is the physicality of everything that you absorbed and took on as her support, her caregiver, as her coach, as her husband and partner in life. That tremendous courage to be able to hold all of that and hold that inside you and protect her from it, shield her from it, and then through it to know what to present to her. And so I just want to honor that as well, because it's not just about life's journey and finding joy. It's about the journey that you've been on as well. And so thank you for sharing both sides of that. It's really to see it from both perspectives. And I know so many people listening can relate to, if not bits and pieces of your journey together. Stina, you okay over there? Just want to make sure.
Yes. What an incredible story. There's so much love in that story. And like skillful love that I recognize from my own experience of being with my dad while he was passing last year. It's a really emotional week. My, it's going to be a blizzard this weekend, so I don't know if I'm going to be able to be with my family, and this is our first year without my dad. So the emotion's really raw. But just hearing Rob's story feels like, in a way, like being seen, because you can't understand what that's like until you have walked that path with someone physically, been by their side. And my mom didn't have the skill that Rob showed up for with his wife to carry the mental load of going through something so difficult. And I carried that for my dad and then my mom when she was hospitalized at the same time with a stroke. So all at once I was carrying that for both of my parents, and there's a real parenting flavor to holding that space, just like there is with coaching. The kind of like love and maturity that it takes, like Rob said, like you're holding things that no one else can hold for this person, and things that they can't make sense of themselves or don't want to make sense of themselves. It was like my communication with my dad was limited because he was on life support and sedated in and out. And then my mom was mentally gone because she had a stroke that affected her short-term memory. So caring for both of my parents in these like extremely compromised states, they were not intentionally choosing, as Rob's wife was, to not be involved in that. But I took on a similar role in those experiences. So it's I just could hear and see like the power of witnessing someone, because I feel that in my own parenting, like the importance of seeing someone and seeing their journey, and the innocence that you also have to bring to that, like to know everything and still bring an innocence to witnessing this person, because you as the supporter can know everything and you still can't completely know their experience. So it's such a wild ride because it's also it's a doula role. It's where you provide all these comfort measures and you're making the experience everything you can make it, and living in that like complete uncertainty with no control over anything. And it just feels like the most raw experience of being human. So when Rob talked about the difference between extending life and extending death, um, perfect words, just perfect words, because I remember that moment, where you start to feel that shift into extending death. And I had been years prior, I had seen my father-in-law pass away from cancer, and he was lucid enough and communicative enough to tell everyone that he was ready to go. He was ready to pull the plug. And he actually passed away, like, I think it was maybe 12 hours, 8 hours before they had scheduled to take him off of the life support. He knew, he felt it. He said had time to say his goodbyes. Like, it was a very intentional thing, but it was also felt. And so I felt that shift too with my dad. And to be the one holding that space and that responsibility, and feeling that shift and thinking, in my situation, my dad wasn't going to get to make that decision. I was going to have to make that call. And how do you start to have that conversation with people that aren't there feeling it, that can't see it? Because I was his only visitor. I was the only one that was physically with him. So it is such a, like, tender place to be, and it's terrifying, and at the same time, like, so rich with, like, presence, because you can't be anywhere else. It just sucks you into fully being there, in that experience. and time kind of doesn't exist. It doesn't matter if you have an unexpected death that happens overnight from a heart attack, or years of going through an illness with someone. In my experience and conversations I've had with people, like, you have all the same emotions. They just either all come in like a 12-hour package, or they come, over years, and then it never ends. And then after that, like, the journey never ends, because you keep going on after that, having new feelings and new thoughts and new perspectives, and, like, re-witnessing the experiences and gaining from that person. And so it's your relationship with them also continues on, like, they continue to live on with you. So thank you so much. It was just really a blessing for me, like, to feel that connection this time of year, this week, and just to hear your story.
Well, Stina, first, I want to thank you very, very much for sharing. And if I could just say, the joy and love on your face when you mentioned your father was so tangible. It was so tangible. And I think you brought up something that is so important for us all to know or hear. And it's something like my wife, she journeyed with breast cancer for 11 years. And in a way, she always rallied. So it was a shock almost that she didn't make it back from that hospital visit. But the idea of witnessing, we are not, first, we'd love to have that power to heal or fix somebody. But as soon as we step into the role of trying to heal and fix, we have made the person an object. They've already lost their identity to a certain extent because of an illness. And so then if we go in there and we're trying to tinker, and it's that parenting, feeling, right? We didn't have kids, Desiree and I, but, I started thinking about, she shouldn't be eating sugar because sugar feeds cancer and all this other stuff. And, but that wasn't my role. My role was to witness her live her life and help her through whatever that journey was. If we circle that back to courage, we think a lot of times that courage is entering the battle, whatever that might be, right? So whether it's, people talk about a disease or it's fighting against something, courage is also fighting for something. And courage is also stepping back, physical courage, to hold yourself back, to let the person experience what they need to experience. And there were times that I remember the first time that my wife wanted to go to India, and I'm thinking to myself, are you effing kidding me? I mean, you're taking chemo, you're neutropenic, you had a stem cell transplant, your white blood cell count is never above 2. And her oncologist, we were going with him. He's like, oh, she's going to be fine. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, my role here is to allow her the experience. If I use that word allow, because I could have sat there and said, no, 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 because I'm too afraid, or say, I am so afraid, but I will let her live what she wants to live. And I am there at her side. If something happens, I will move heaven and earth. But if she wants to go to India, we're going to go to India. And it wound up being every 6-month trip, because she volunteered in a hospital in India, and that's what she wanted to do. So, but I love the idea that you brought up witness, because physical courage isn't always about pushing and fighting and moving and doing. So much of that is just restraining yourself from interrupting the flow of somebody else's life. And I think you would probably say the same thing as you were talking about your dad. I knew in my heart of hearts the biggest gift I could give her, because I love her and I loved her. I mean, I still love her, is to carry that. And we do move on, and it changes. We move forward. Let me change that. We move forward. We don't move on, because it becomes part of us. I always say something I use personally, and it's a visual I have in my mind, is, so if you think sometimes when you're courageous, right, you get scarred for whatever reason. And I have a beautiful scar for having loved, cared for, and lost Desiree. And I know it's there, and I cherish it, because it's part of what she and I signed up for with our vows, but it's also the idea of life, because we don't get to choose the experiences. Viktor Frankl didn't get to choose the experience. Edith Eger didn't get to choose the experience. People that have had child abuse and all this other stuff. But if we can look at that to find purpose, find strength, find a definition, I find through my work and the journey after Desiree and becoming a life coach, that everybody says that our past creates our future. But to a certain extent, what I've come to realize is my present redefines my past. And so, yes, I am a widower, and everything else, but I know that whole experience made me who I am today. And so that idea of being present, like you said, when you're in the throes of an illness, you are 100% present. And I think that's what helped Ezra and I really find joy and step into it, because to really feel joy, you have to be completely vulnerable. You have to be completely courageous. To get hurt, there is no more armor. I say this all the time, like, we armor up for life. A lot of people armor up for life. And if you just think about the weight of armor, number one, but two, you have the slit here that you see through because you're wearing the helmet. How much of life are you really experiencing? So when you take off that armor and you step in courageously, and courage and vulnerability, to me, it's the same thing. You step into that, you really live life. And you realize that it's not the ups and the downs, it's that daily moment. And I'm sure you remember times of, your dad smiling. We all have those memories. I was lucky enough way back when I was an investment banker. We stayed at great hotels. I can't tell you what one lobby looked like, but I can tell you about my wife laughing at an episode of Friends, especially when Phoebe went, my eyes, my eyes. She would just roll on the floor laughing, and I'll remember that forever. So I think, just to tie it into the courage thing, if we allow ourselves to take off the armor, if we allow ourselves to step in vulnerably, 100% courageously, we live an amazing life. If we try to hide from all the pain in life, we're living a fraction of what life should be.
We're on our People Come First book launch with Jenny and John Chepler and my husband Terry and I. John brought up the blanket idea. Like, we are born and things get a blanket and things get put on us, and we put things on ourselves. And then you were talking about your wife's experience, and especially towards the end, how the blankets were just coming off and her light was just shining so strongly. And I love that analogy and that discussion that happened. And when I think about how in the hearing, every time I hear you interviewed or get together with you over the phone or whatever, there's just more of your story I get. And thank you for that. And especially thank you for the beautiful share today as well, is how the idea of she didn't want to hear, what she was dealing with, that you were going to hear. A blanket was coming at her and she's like, no. And a doctor brought a blanket towards her and she said, no. It's like, yes, we can say no to those blankets. And many times it takes a great deal of courage to say no. I absolutely love that whole analogy. Thank you.
No, thank you. And saying no, I work a lot with my clients on boundaries, and people tell me I tend to be the king of boundaries because it seems my first answer is always no, and now more than anything else. But that's another part of being courageous. You're 100% right. Being vulnerable and stepping into life doesn't mean that you're just a pushover. Being vulnerable is stepping in and saying, this is who I am. This is how I want to live. These are my requirements for life because I value the life I've been given. And that takes a lot of courage because we are taught from a very young age to conform. We're taught that we're supposed to, fit in. And I have a big thing about fitting in, because if we all try to fit in, we're betraying ourselves. We're here to stand out. We're not here to fit in. And so it takes a lot of courage to stand out. And I joke, I think I made up a word, but I probably haven't, because the idea of coming out is so tied to sexuality. But coming out really just means saying, this is who I am. And that's a very courageous act. So I call it self-uology in my book, because I'm like, we all have to come out to our self-uolity, that this is who we are. And I require this to live. And so my wife, she gave a lot of speeches, and that's how I got to be known in the palliative care community, because her saying, no, I don't want to know things, was hit with a lot of resistance. And she said, you know what? Every patient has a choice on how they want to deal with something. They shouldn't be a victim to a process. But if you think about life in general, the gift we are given as human beings is we have the ability to make a choice. So why in the world would we relinquish that? We should all be out there courageously making choices that are in harmony with who we are. And maybe life would be a lot better. Now we have become a society where we're all in echo chambers and our feeds are all customized and we only hear one thing. And I think that's behind a lot of the polarization now, because we don't see anybody else anymore. The world's become way, way too small. And we all want to fit in within a box. But the beauty of true diversity is mindset, that we all bring something different to the table. And that's the real colorful part, right? So anyway, a little deviation from courage, but thanks, Linda.
Thank you for bringing up boundaries, and Rob and Stina and Linda and everyone. There's something about this raw and real energy that is so soothing to me. What comes to me when I think of physical courage is the process of healing from an abusive marriage, one that looked very different from the one that you so beautifully shared about, Rob. And how leaving and saying no to that situation made me realize that boundaries were never about the things I couldn't control. It was never about the other person. It was about me knowing myself, showing up for myself, and trusting myself to keep myself safe. And I just had such a beautiful session with one of my clients around this, who very recently experienced sexual abuse. How we get to define ourselves by the way we choose to heal, not what is outside of our control and what was done to us, but the way that we choose to live and be alive. And I also love that there's so much respect in this space that we're holding for each other, and the space that you held for your wife. I think that making the choice every day to allow other people to have the leading role in their own lives, I think that's the highest respect that you can show another human being. Also to yourself, because that means that you're able to be present and keep the leading role in your own life and enjoy yours as well. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jenny, for a beautiful transition into talking about boundaries and how courageous it's been for you to work with your on that, and also for yourself, what the journey that you've been on, transitioning and healing from an abusive marriage. What's coming up for me, and I'm going to tie this back to Rob and Desiree, is something that I read about Desiree questioning whether she had underestimated herself or underestimated some of her patients in like offering palliative. And again, in those moments when it was offered to her and she wasn't ready for it. I think beauty of experiencing life and being owning your self-duality, if you will, it is like not underestimating yourself, but like not underestimating others too. And I resonate with that in the sense of like, I'll go back to my leaving a toxic work environment. I was very underestimated. I didn't even know what I was capable at that point for myself, but they estimated me and I felt that. There was a very strong moment at the end of my tenure with that role where the previous owners were like, "You'll never make it without us." And I was like, "Aha, just wait, like you'll see." Like, and I was like challenged because I didn't like know what I was capable of. I was determined to like prove them wrong and prove myself right. Like, it's such a powerful example of different ways that we can often underestimate each other, underestimate ourselves, and not put ourselves out there, or not let somebody else have the space to live courageously and boldly and vulnerably the way that they choose to and get to. And it's a lesson for all of us to learn how to be better examples of that, not others, but for us. So that's what was coming up for me as I hear everybody share about boundaries, experiences, and the resilience and courage in all of our lives. Dorit, I know you've got a story as well. What's coming to you when we think about physical courage? And yeah, like, we'd love for you to share if you're open to it.
Yeah, well, all the emotions have just been you guys know that I connect with the heart, and it's easy to sit here with the microphone muted and just listen. But as soon as I'm starting to talk, it all comes flooding. And I've never experienced any loss like you have, Rob, and or you, Stina. I've never been there. But I'm really feeling for you and holding space for you, and I can't even imagine how I would be in a situation like that. At some point, I will lose someone close to me. I'm aware of that, but up to this point, the closest thing I've come to the physical courage is for my own part, after my complete burnout, when I was ill for 7 years and didn't find any reason to live. That was, well, the doctor said there was nothing to do. I was just have to learn to live with it. I didn't feel that I was of use for anyone. I needed help from my family to absolutely everything. And I started questioning my worth. What's the point of me being here? And after 7 years of that, I kind of hit rock bottom. So when an opportunity opened up and I had the chance to try something completely random and different, I did. And for me, that was a game changer. And it helped me heal first my body, and I was able to kind of start fighting back, get the courage that I needed to kind of see that, hey, I have some value, I have a purpose, and I can use this this experience from the past 7 years to kind of help everyone else to avoid ending up in a situation like I did, because I didn't listen to my body. I didn't listen to the warning signs. I just plowed on like a runaway train and was completely blocking out everything that I should have listened to. And yeah, so this is how that's the only experience I can think of right now, because of all the all the emotions from you guys. But I hope that's enough.
Dorit, that is more than enough. It's beautiful. Thank you for sharing with us and for being courageous and vulnerable in these moments to not only show up, but to listen, whether when you're on mute or not, and to let it all come tumbling beautifully when you're not muted.
I'm
there's
not
no
very good
better
at hiding my
story than the
feelings,
one that
that's
you
for
just
sure. So
Could I Dorit, I would love to add something because first I think it's so beautiful that you come from your heart, right? And that's such a gift to allow that, to feel that, because we have those emotions, and if we hide from them, what you saw are those emotions. We were given them, and we should feel them. You know, you said you haven't really experienced sort of a loss like Stina or I have somewhat experienced. And I would counter that to saying those 7 years, you actually lost yourself.
yeah, I did. Yeah.
You did. And
Mm.
to sit there and say that, you know, you felt like you didn't have any value or any worth. One of the things that I've come to realize, I tend to be an acronym person, by the way. So I'm just warning, I don't know if we'll fall into acronyms, but we may. So when I started really looking at loss, for me, loss was the lack of self and security. The situation you were in where you felt you didn't have worth, you lost self, and the world didn't seem safe because there was nobody that could help you with what you were going through.
Mm-hmm.
So you went through, whether it was awareness or not, you did go through a grieving process.
Oh yeah.
That brought you to a point, a courageous point, to say, no, I've been given this life, and I will find my way. And I joke all the time about, as we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, nowhere does it say, sit down, light a fire, and roast marshmallows. It says you have to walk through. And that's physical courage, to not just sit there in the middle of the valley and say, hey, you know what? I could start a fire here. I'm comfortable. I'm done walking. No, you continue to walk. And so even though it's not defined, let's say, as a death of a loved one, you had a death of a part of yourself in those years.
Yeah, I grieved. Like I remember the first couple of years, I really grieved the loss of the life that I had, the job that I had, all the things that I used to do that I couldn't do anymore. Like reading books, because I couldn't focus long enough then to read a paragraph. And when I started on the second paragraph, I'd forgotten what I read, so I had to start over again. So just small things like that. My memory was completely gone. I couldn't even remember to pick up my girls from school. I had to have like alarms and reminders everywhere, just to get things like that done. So yeah, just tiny things that means a lot, and when you get it back, it's so amazing. Yeah, the things we take for granted.
But look at the courage that you actually showed to continue to walk through, because, you know, there is a point where you could just resign to a situation and say, "Ah, this is just the way my life is going to be," and that's it. And you said no. It's that whole idea of no again, like Jenny saying, no, this relationship is not working for me. And sometimes it may take some of us longer to get to that no. But that is, in a way, where courage can actually spark from. You know, for me, I think courage with Desiree definitely came from my love for her. My courage to rebuild my life and become who I am now was, in a way, to say, no, I'm not going to let this loss and death define me, where I then just live sort of a not boring life, but it was like, I'll just stay on this path and I will just be content. And I said, no, I don't want to be content with life. I don't want to be complacent. I want to go out there and I want to see what I'm capable of. And that requires to say no to some of those things, right? I had to say no to my mother wanted to take care of me. She thought, okay, here I was a 40-something-year-old guy, but she's like, you should be moving next to me and I should make you pasta and I should take care of you. And I'm like, no, I'm going to go move to Italy and I'm going to, I don't know, try to build a life in Italy. And, you know, and then of course she was angry, but that was a no to the standard that I was supposed to follow as the widower. And I went out there and said, no, I'm going to rebuild my life. And some people it wasn't met well with. And I had to say no.
Thank you.
Rob, the ability to say yes to life and figure out and honor what you were meant to do, what you wanted to do, and boldly and courageously as you have been doing, these are the possibilities in action that you often talk about, right? The finding those. I think that's a great place to bring this physical courage back. Could you talk a little bit more about how you help other people experience these possibilities in action?
Sure. You know, it really comes down to, and we talked about it a little earlier, about sort of being the main character in your life. To become possibility in action is to write the narrative of your story, is to realize that there are possibilities all around us, but if we don't take action, they remain in the land of wishing. So it's breaking through all these habitual patterns, all these blankets, right? All these things that have been put on us where we've forgotten who we are or what we really wanted. So I've transitioned more to running personal growth retreats where we do this. So it's over 7-day intensive course and it's in Italy. So there's great food and great places to visit and good wine and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, it is trying to understand what are the small steps I can take to move from the path I've been on where I don't feel aligned to the path where I feel aligned. You know, for me, one of the reasons I became a coach is when I looked at my situation after Desiree and I had to grieve Robert, the husband, I asked myself, what is one of the things because of course I still miss her today. I mean, I miss her every second, but what was something I missed about that Robert? And it was that I was supporting her. I was like, oh, that's life coach. I could become a life coach. But the possibility in action idea is that life doesn't define us. Life doesn't give us a situation and say, now this is the way you're going to live. Life is saying, here is something, what is possible that you can make from this? And that's what I think this whole life is all about. Once we understand our values, and Linda knows I say this all of the time about our light, right? You take off those blankets and you're a big light. First of all, if the people around you need sunglasses, they're not the right people for you. That's step number one. You might have to go and find a new tribe. But you start to look at those things, and that all requires courage, but you can't do it. You can't go from A to Z. You have to go A to A minus, B minus, B plus, you know, and work your way in a certain way. It's slowly. But once you become the craftsperson, and that's the big thing here. To be possibility in action means you're actually crafting your life. We can't change the experiences that are coming to us, but we can change the definition of them and use them for something else. And at the end of the day, we're left with a beautiful mosaic. And having lived in Rome for many years, an analogy I use is if you go and look at ancient mosaics, Each piece was cut by hand, so each piece is imperfect. But together, the imperfections create the depth and beauty of that mosaic. And so those experiences, if we label them as negative, they're just part of the depth of that mosaic. Continue to build the picture. So I ask people to start with the end in mind. What is it you really want to look back on? For me, for example, I wanted to look back on living, after 𝗥cie, living in Italy, attempting something different, seeing if I could pull it off. It wasn't about actually it working. I wanted to go out there and be the explorer in my life. And that's what I realized is the narrative of the story I'm writing. So that's how I work with people to get to that.
If only we could all be that courageous all the time. If only. But we're doing it, right? We show up here for a week, and so many of the clients that we work with are doing it and putting in the time and effort to create the life that they desire. And we're here for it. And I think that's so beautiful. So thank you today for joining Rob, sharing your stories, more about the work that you do, your experiences, and ways that we can all live more courageously and harness those possibilities in action. If anybody is watching and wants to do these conversations with any or all of us, we are available to you. And please feel free to reach out to us on platforms. Find us, which is pretty much everywhere, the platform of your choice. And we'd be happy to continue the conversation with you and discuss things with you more. And we welcome that. So please follow along, come back for more high vibe conversations. We will be taking next week off. So please enjoy the rest of your holidays. We wish you a happy new year as well. And we will reconvene in 2023. Until then, thank you for being here today. Thank you for joining us, holding space for us. We love and support you. We'll say bye for now.